Good evening and happy Sunday. Yeah, Sunday. Damn days all blend together. We'll get into this as always. Sam Reichard. Get the chapter done, and then I'll talk about some current events afterward. Chapter 7: Slipping Shackles. A cool breeze drifted through the cavern entrance, carrying the briny scent of stale seaweed. Gareth had spent enough time on the sea to know when he was near one. He could see filtered light through the cloth clinging to his face. A rag had been stuffed into his mouth and tied in place, keeping him from talking. His hands and feet were bound behind him. Laying his face down on the rocky terrain, his body ached as if he'd completely exhausted himself and hadn't had a chance to recuperate. Footsteps echoed past, telling him he wasn't alone. He tried to focus on his anger. It would be the only thing that was going to save him, but it wouldn't flow. He was too worn out to linger on the pain. Another pair of boots walked by, pausing near him. Gareth felt a pair of hands grab his arms, lifting him up. He didn't know where they were taking him, but surely it would be short-lived. They wouldn't be stupid enough to give him a chance to escape. The temperature dropped slightly, but he felt warm. They had to be taking him deeper into the caves. What kind of Drew camps at the entrance? Doesn't it burn them? He felt the impact of the cold, hard ground. It was gentle, all things considered, but he was sure they wanted him to feel some pain. He'd felt them tying more ropes around his arms. It didn't make much sense. He was already bound. How much more thorough could they be about it? To his surprise, he felt his arms separate from his legs, allowing the sore muscles to return to a more natural position. He pulled against the bindings, realizing what they had done. He was still bound, just not in a manner in which he couldn't move. They pulled him to his feet, putting his own weight on them. He staggered in... Thank you for the share. Pulled him to his feet, putting his own weight on them. He staggered, disoriented in the sensory deprivation. Not to mention the fact that he hadn't walked for the last few days. He wasn't sure how long they had him, but it was certainly long enough for his body to lose some of its muscle memory. They pulled against his arms, guiding him backward. He felt something hard impact his knees, buckling them. To his surprise, there was a bench awaiting. The Muldaran ran the ropes through the holes in the wooden seat, pulling tight to keep him secured. Assured he couldn't move, they ripped the bag from over his head and untied the gag, stepping aside. Gareth was able to see for the first time since he had passed out. It wasn't much of a sight. The bright yellow entrance blocked out most of the details than his single eye could have normally given him. He could see a lone figure seated in front of him, the man's back to the entrance. Gareth Drewslayer, I must say I never expected to see you in such a position. Moreover, I never expected to be in the position I am in. His throat was dry from lack of water, but he forced the gravelly words out anyway. Then why don't we switch? You sit here, and I promise I'll cut your ears off before I run the blade through your neck. The figure let out a light chuckle at the man's rebellion. He truly was everything the rumors claimed to be. Oh, I don't believe that to be necessary. You and I are no different. You and I aren't so different. I've been looking at the computer screen all day, so words are kind of blending together. We both want the same thing. He nodded to one of the Muldaran. The man approached, extending the water skin to the parched Drewslayer. Gareth glanced down at the open container. You really think I'd drink anything you gave me? For all I know, it's poisoned. Look at it this way. If I wanted you dead, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I could simply keep you bound, and starvation would claim you within the next day or two. So ask yourself this. If I wanted you dead, why would I waste perfectly good poison to make it happen? He had a point. Gareth couldn't deny it. He nodded to the pink-skinned figure beside him, tipping his head back to take a drink. It soothed his throat, but hurt when it reached his stomach. It wasn't nearly as bad as before, but it certainly reminded him of how long it had been since he'd eaten. Clearing his throat, he returned his focus to the silhouette. Features were beginning to peer against the backdrop of light. So you aren't going to kill me. Why am I here? As I said, we want the same thing. The Druifar are no friend of mine. They're just as likely to kill us as they are you. What's the old saying? The enemy of my enemy is my friend? We're not friends. For all I know, this is some trap set up to get me to reveal something. He paused once again, sitting back in his chair. And what do you think you have that I don't already know? You're so full of yourself. I'm afraid you're of little value when it comes to information. Your life, on the other hand, well, that's greatly valued, and as it just so happens, you have valuable friends as well. One of these friends has applied this value to my commander and our people. That in and of itself has granted you salvation, especially since you killed so many of my men. I can understand your confusion under the circumstances. So you're just going to let me go? In due time. I have a couple questions I'd like to ask you. First off, do you know what this is? He held up a brown satchel, exposing the shimmering black book inside. We took it from you while you were out. My men have looked it over from cover to cover, but haven't been able to find so much as a single scribe mark. We know it's magical. I don't know. I found it in the tunnels. I thought it'd be good kindling if I needed to make a fire. I see. Well, we're going to hang on to it for you for the time being. Wouldn't want it getting damaged until you have need of a fire. He smiled, suggesting he knew more than he was letting on. Secondly, when you killed my men, you were using a magic none of us have ever seen before. Do you know how you did it? Or perhaps some way we could learn it? I don't know what to tell you. It started a couple weeks ago. It just happens sometimes, usually when I get mad. As for teaching someone how to do it, I wouldn't know where to start. I don't even know how I control it myself. That's a shame. Perhaps those answers will be revealed to you soon. That's all I have for you for now. I hope you understand, but I can't risk letting you loose upon my men. I wouldn't want you to get mad again. And we both know what happened last time. We'll set out in the morning. Until then, you'll be kept separate from my men. Food and water will be provided. And once you're done, you'll be bound and gagged for the duration of your stay. When we reach our destination, I promise you'll never be kept against your will by my people ever again. Gareth watched the light fade, feeling the thick cloths take their place over his head once again. The towering wall stretched across the land, running 100 miles in both directions. At the center of its massive bastion stood a massive bastion stood erect, overlooking the approaching army of men. The majority wore the blue and green tabard of Shadgull, though a fair many were dressed in black and green. Those few hung to the outskirts of the group, serving as added protection in the unlikely chance they were attacked. Rimley pulled the reins of his horse. The majestic creature was a mixture of brown and white, as if the white patches had been splattered across and evenly as if the white patches had been splattered across and eventually took dominance. It was a paint. Looking over the ancient post, he surveyed the guard posted atop the structure and on foot at the closed gateway. Glancing over at his son, he gave a reassuring smile. Center of the tunnel, is there anything I need to look for? Eric dismounted from his horse and approached his father. I'm told you'll know what you're looking for when you get there. I guess it's something only the owner of the coronet would recognize. The fair-haired man threw his leg over the steed and jumped down. His armor shifted under the weight of impact. Adjusting it, he stood to his full height and grabbed the crown from atop his head. Spinning it between his fingers, he looked into the colored gems, seeing the reflection of his aging face. Eric, I'll do this one last thing. Pausing, he glanced up to look into his son's eyes. When it's done, we return home. At that point, I plan to retire. I've had too many years, and it's time for you to take my place. Rimley placed his hand on Eric's shoulder, giving him a light shake. Spinning around, he marched toward the sealed gate, replacing his crown. Baron Rimley, what brings you this far north? I made a promise to my boy. Would you open the gate for me? The guard paused a moment, keeping his eyes locked on the towering man. He yelled his command into the wall. Raise the gate! Baron Rimley requires entry! He stepped inside, allowing access. Rimley approached the portcullis, watching the reinforced steel raise up into the stone and out of sight. He stared into the empty tunnels, faintly seeing the opening at the other side. It had to have been at least a quarter mile to the other opening. Why anyone needed such a wide wall was beyond him, even in times of war. It did have some logic to it. Its size made it nearly impossible to scale with any real force of number. It would be next to impossible to destroy even the smallest section, despite the amount of resources its construction had taken. It was a valuable tool when facing an invasion. It could limit the largest army to little more than a handful at a time, turning an otherwise impossible battle into one of endurance. Taking a deep breath, he marched into the dark passageway, watching the closest torches flare up in response to his approach. The sound of his men standing idle faded, replaced with the echoes of his leather-soled boots against the stone floor. Reaching what he guessed was the middle, he removed his crown and searched for any sign of his quarry. Eric watched his father fade into the distance. He was little more than a speck in the middle of shadow. A familiar thud echoed to his left. Glancing over, he spotted the red and black fletchings of an arrow protruding from one of his knight's chest. The man toppled from his saddle, landing in the tall grass. Roars echoed from the ancient bastion and dense grass around the army. Men sprang up from nowhere, lashing out at the unsuspecting caravan. Eric drew his swords, looking around for the closest attacker. "It's a trap! Be on your guards!" He parried a sword, bringing his offhand to run the man through. Spinning around, he stabbed into another, saving one of his knights that hadn't gotten off his horse yet. He quickly surveyed their number. The ambush was well laid out, but they lacked the manpower to overrun such a large group. Had they just been the original riders, perhaps, but they'd picked up many from Aldridge and several more from Marbane. His mind raced. Do we have a mole? How else would they know how many left Shadgold with us? Retreating from his thoughts, he blocked another attack, looking into the man's face. I recognized him. Recalling where he'd seen him before, the various visions returned. There it was. This man was one he had arrested, not a few months back. He was caught cutting purses in the market square, yet he clearly was dressed as one of the wall guards. The young prince ran the man through. Pulling his weapon free, he glanced around, seeing the fated battle coming to an end. The bandits never stood a chance against so many, yet they were very well organized. This meant there had to be a higher plan to all of this. Eric looked down the tunnel, finding his father. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. His heart sank, feeling the shattered figure in the tunnel with him. There was no way to get there in time if the figure was a threat. Abandoning all tack, he charged, rushing into the stone archway. Leviathan watched the deceived bear and searched for the doorway. The man was off by several feet, though he'd never know it. He didn't know what he was looking for. Seeing his opportunity, he quietly made his way behind the man, bringing his dagger up to finish the job. Blade in hand, he selected the perfect location and plunged the weapon toward its mark. "No, you will not kill him." Rimley ran his fingers across the stone, unable to find the slightest markings. The clink of blades echoed along the dark corridor, reaching his ears. He froze, listening intently. He turned toward the entrance, seeing the signs of battle outside. His son stood in the distance, frozen in fear. He had to get there. Their men needed to be commanded. Taking his first step toward the exit, a sharp pain shot through his spine. He crumpled to the cold stone floor, unable to move. Staring up at the aged ceiling of perfectly aligned bricks, he watched a pale orc-faced mask step into sight. Cain struggled against his body, forcing the blade lower than it had been aimed. He was too late. The blade sank into its target, burying itself to the hilt. He slowly approached the dying man, feeling remorse for what he'd just done. Kneeling down beside him, he propped him up, hoping to make his final moments comfortable. Pulling the mask away, he stared into the fading eyes, seeing a mixture of emotion in the gaze. "I'm sorry. I tried to stop him." Rimley silently wept. He couldn't find the strength to speak. His body was growing cold with each passing moment. Lips quivering, he wished he could tell Tell the tell the noble warrior that he forgave him. The words couldn't reach his mouth. Fear and nervousness flowed through him, claiming a bit more of his conscious mind. He knew he wouldn't last much longer. Holding the man tight, Kane watched the life leave his friend. He wished there was something he could do, but even he was a prisoner to all of it. Anger flooded him. How could he have allowed himself to be trapped as he had? You shouldn't be able to do this. You're mine. I did the ritual. You cannot power through it. The enraged prince ran as fast as he could. He was out of breath, but he had to keep going, watching his father fall, unable to do anything about it. Seeing his perfect opportunity to claim revenge, he brought one of his swords overhead and flung it as hard as he could at the crouching figure. He watched the weapon flip end over end, flying toward its target. Leviathan forced the rebellious warrior back down. Glancing up, he noticed the incoming sword. Timing it out, he threw his dagger up, knocking the sharp weapon off its trajectory. The wild blade flew past him, sending a sharp pain through his side. He glanced down, realizing it had cut him. What was worse, the orc skull mask lied broken beneath the blade at his side. Sighing his irritation, he snatched up the crown and stood, peering down the tunnel at the approaching prince. A sadistic smile came to him. Twisting the coronet, he aligned the reflected torchlight off the colored gems. The focus beam reflected on the wall, finding their mark. He listened to the hidden doorway open up, turning to face the prince. I told you such pursuits came with a heavy price. You should have listened to me. Eric couldn't make out the man's identity. He was human, that much was clear, but the distance and shadow made it difficult to see detail. He had one chance to make all of this right. Exhaling, he brought his remaining sword up and threw it, hoping he could right all of these wrongs with one final blow. Leviathan stepped into the open doorway, hearing the steel on stone behind him. Glancing back at the unarmed prince, he smiled one last time. Thanks for doing all of this for me. I might have had a difficult time with it by myself. Stepping through the threshold, he heard the stone shift behind him, stealing the hidden tunnel away. Dark green moss clung to the jagged stones and aged mortar of the abandoned keep. The wooden ceiling was torn open, revealing an array of deep blue clouds and twinkling stars in the distance. Ravion felt the cool air rush through the crumbling room, biting through his thin clothing. He watched the flicker of lantern dance across the warped table. The wood was solid but weathered, leaving deep grooves in the grain where the wood had dried out. Leaving deep grooves where the grain had dried out. Dipping the tip of the feathered quill into the tiny vial of ink, he scribed the words onto the rough parchment. Watching the black liquid soak into the page, dotting the final line containing his name, he laid the quill in its stand and gently blew across the ink, letting it dry. Tearing the parchment down to size, he rolled it and lifted the shield on the lantern, exposing the orange and yellow flame. Grabbing a stick of red wax, he twisted the melted end into the flame, watching it turn from a solid stick into a dense, glossy fluid. Wiping the corner of the melted wax over the loose end of the miniature scroll, he quickly pressed a seal into it and watched it retake its solid state. Approaching the window, he let out a sharp whistle. A moment later, a raven flew into sight, taking perch on the rotted seal. He carefully tied the scroll to the bird's leg and held out his finger. The raven climbed onto it, balancing himself. Ravion stared into the bird's eyes, holding a silent conversation. Raising his hand, the bird took flight, disappearing into the night sky. A shadow took form on the wall beside him. He turned to look upon Sonaria leaning up against the wooden doorframe. The door had long since fallen off its hinges, but the frame seemed to be in good shape despite the moisture it had obviously suffered. Lady Sonaria, I trust you're finding everything to your liking? He let out a smile, assuming she held a similar opinion. You weren't lying when you said it needed work. It will suffice, though. We have trees and stone nearby. Give it a few months and we can rebuild it as good as new. She paused a moment, staring at her friend. Do you believe he'll help us? He's a good man, I believe he will, though it may not be in the most direct manner. His type prefers indirect action. At least that's how they like to make it seem. I'm sure we'll know something by morning. I'm grateful for all the help you've given. I don't believe we'd be in as good a shape we are without your guidance. Recent events considered, she smiled. You honor me, though I believe you'd do the same were our roles reversed. I'm not so sure. You forget the pain we caused before the breaking. Were I in your shoes, I don't think I would have ever been as lenient, let alone taken action to aid a creature responsible for so much death. Cenaria's tone shifted, recalling the memories that tortured her. He stepped forward, taking her hand. When you've seen as much as I have, you learn to forgive easily. It doesn't do any good to dwell on the past. The only thing that matters is how you proceed into the future. Some things can never be forgiven. She stared down at the floor, solemn in her words. Ravion slowly reached out, pressing his fingers against the bottom of her chin. Gently lifting her head, he stared up into her almond-shaped brown eyes. Anything can be forgiven. The trick is never forgetting. The two go hand in hand. Cenarius smiled, stepping close to him. His warmth felt good in the cool air. Looking up into his eyes, she felt his arms wrap around her. And you think we can be forgiven? I know you can. You've already started down the correct path. It's up to you where you go from there. Will you be there to right me when I'm wrong? A smile breached his lips. I'll be around whenever you need me. Though I've faith you're strong enough to find your own. She pressed her lips against him, cutting him off. Rays of sunlight beamed through the open roof, landing on Ravion's face. He opened his eyes, feeling their warmth on his skin. Coming to his senses, he recalled the night's events and studied the beautiful woman lying next to him. Her skin was perfect in the morning light. She was curled up beside him, buried in the fur blanket. He felt lost in her sight. The light silver hair was scattered about her face and split, revealing a single, slightly pointed ear. He didn't want to get up and risk waking her. This was the first time he'd slept in an actual bed in as long as he could remember. That was reason enough to stay. He took a deep breath and carefully climbed out of bed. Trying to sneak away? Cenarius opened her eyes, smiling at the naked man. Not exactly. You looked comfortable, and I didn't want to wake you. I need to see if my message was received. Ravion pulled his clothes on and leaned over the bed, kissing her softly. Quickly making his way back to the study, he found a scroll lying on the worn table. A familiar stamp rested in the green wax. He snatched up the message and broke the seal. The fine parchment unrolled, pulling itself from his hands. Floating in front of him, the words echoed out in their author's voice. Son of House Santel, I appreciate you reaching out to me with news of these findings. I would like to know more details when time permits. As per your requested information, I'm afraid only the Lord of Krondar has the ability to grant such deed. Fortunately for your needs, no man currently holds such title. Krondar is unique in the sense that it has no noble lineage. Its populace is comprised entirely of refugees and outsiders. Therefore, any plot of land that has not been claimed is available, though there is no legal proceeding to true ownership. In the absence of a lord, I will tell you that the barbarian people hold one sacred law higher than any other. Strength rules supreme. If someone is not strong enough to hold on to what they have, they don't deserve to keep it. This has benefit and penalty, depending on which spectrum you fall. Thank you again for reaching out. It's been far too long, and I look forward to meeting you again in the near future. Additionally, if one desires to claim lordship over Krondar, one must simply evoke the right of Godric, at the city's heart of Fenderspear. Though do not do so lightly. Rarely does one make it past the first day. Sincerely, Paramin Salazar, former Archmagus of the Tower and former Baron of Dalmora. Ravion watched the scroll burst into flames and gently float to the warped floorboards. The red embers disappeared into the flaky ash, breaking apart at the light breeze. Huh, is that all? He chuckled at the thought, wondering how far his endeavors would take him. Cenarius walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around his chest. Resting her chin on his shoulder, she quietly spoke. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" He placed his hand atop of hers, feeling the warm, soft skin. "I fear I have to. Your people could make a home here, and chances are they'd be just fine for many years. But people are greedy. One day someone would come and demand you leave. I know the outcome of such an order. There's no sense in future bloodshed when I have the ability to staunch it now." Sonaria kissed his neck, whispering into his ear. "You're a noble man, Ravion Santel. This land is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have you." Spinning around to keep her arms in place, Ravion pulled her close and kissed her. "I think I may be the lucky one. I've wandered this realm longer than I care to remember, and never have I found one quite like you." And that is the end of the chapter. Thank you all for turning in. Everybody that shared the page, comments, and whatnot. Thanks. You guys help keep it going. Current events. Order of the Trident 3 is back from the editor as of, I want to say, last Friday. So, a few days. I've been going through it, making sure everything's good to go and finished. It will be done, if I just keep working on it and don't do anything else, it could be done in about 2 days. But, unfortunately, I have responsibilities. So, I will be publishing that one in probably about 2 weeks. It'll be plenty ready in time for TriCon, so I will have all 3 of the Order of the Trident books there. So, next weekend, I'll be at the Ozark Empire Fairgrounds. There's a gun show that I will be working a table at for books. I don't really fall in with that crowd, considering that I don't write gun books, but it'll be fun either way. So swing by and see me there. I was supposed to have been at LibraryCon in 2 weeks' time. Unfortunately, I had a mishap, and dates all kind of blend together when you do as much stuff as I seem to do. And my aunt's wedding is that exact weekend, exact same day, exact same time. There's no way that I could go to LibraryCon and then get down to Oklahoma for her wedding. So I have canceled my appearance at LibraryCon, which kind of sucks because there's a lot of fun people that I would like to see there, but shit happens. So I'll be going to Oklahoma that weekend. And again, this following weekend I'll be at the Ozark Empire Fairgrounds with books. I believe my next appearance after that is TriCon, which is September. I looked up the date a little bit ago. 8th through 10th, I think. If I'm wrong, correct me. And then I don't know if I have anything after that. I'll have to look. But all in all, things are happening. My blog post should be up tomorrow. I usually try to aim for about 1 p.m. It's a weird thing. The blog post has to be Pacific time, so I set it for like 11 a.m. there, and it comes in at 1 p.m. here. So yeah, that's about all I've got. I posted the cover for book 3 on my page earlier, and if you're watching this video, then you pretty much have access to my page. So, check that out. It looks much better than I could have anticipated. And I'll keep doing what I do if you guys keep doing what you do. So, I'm going to get off here and get back to work. We will talk to you later. Bye.